So before we kick off, I'd firstly like to remind you to participate in the conversations either through the hashtag, so Amplify Fest, or use the Amplify app or Twitter, or also the hub for AMP staff to post any questions and also share your notes and thoughts as we go through the session. Today's panel discussion is sponsored by Accenture, and I'd really like to thank them for their support in helping us to rethink everything about living longer and being more harmonious. So thank you, Accenture. And I've got the absolute pleasure this morning of introducing Mark Halverson from Accenture. Mark is the Managing Partner of Financial Services for Accenture in Tokyo, and Mark's going to lead our panel discussion today and kick off with some introductory remarks. So I'd like you to join me in welcoming Mark, and he'll introduce the panel later and hand over to you. So thank you very much, Mark.
Great. Thank you, Megan. So I have the very coveted pre-lunch position, so hopefully you'll be able to stay with us. As Megan said, my name is Mark Halverson. The way I find myself to this podium is in Accenture. Among other things, I've run our wealth and asset management practice globally. And as part of that, I've individually been involved in a lot of retirement discussions. So as an example, I spent a lot of time with one of the trillion-dollar asset managers in the US, and we did a series of studies around retirement. And the ingoing hypothesis was that retirement is about money. Retirement has nothing to do with money. So in our surveys, the three top items that were very clearly pronounced, the first and foremost that people care about is living with dignity. Living with dignity. The second, leaving a legacy. The third, and remote third, was guaranteed income in retirement. So for me, that was a great wake-up call to think not just about money, but to think about what is retirement, what is the human nature of retirement. So I'm very proud to be here on behalf of Accenture and to even be part of the mission of Amplify. So Annalie has been very kind to us in helping get us involved and allow us to be part of that mission. So as was mentioned, I am lucky to be an American living in Japan. Michael mentioned earlier today, Japan is the most rapidly aging demography in the world. So many people would suggest that that is where many things will happen first and be indicative of what might occur in other parts of the world. So I've been lucky enough to work with the World Economic Forum, working with some of the ministries there, the Tokyo 20 Olympic Committee, to discuss what is it that needs to be positioned within Japan to be successful. So that's a little bit about me. What I want to talk more about is the social architecture construct. And as a group, I've been lucky enough to make the new friends that are on the panel this week in the last few days. And we were talking about social architecture, and that's a little bit of an esoteric concept. It certainly has many syllables, but it's also a bit of a strange topic. So what we were trying to do is get back to a social structure. And the social structure we were talking about is the fundamental shift that we're going through now in the land of technology change. The pace of technology change has been dramatic. It's literally changing our role as human beings. So what one could argue, as I do, is that at least in mature economies, we have addressed Maslow's hierarchy of needs in many ways, the lower tiers. So for those of you that are familiar with that concept, food, shelter, clothing, and some of our fundamental issues sit at the base. Now, one could argue that the technology that's overcome many, many different scarcities is actually allowing us to address those lower tiers directly. Now, what happens when we move from being human doers, which were focused on those lower tiers, and those lower tiers are taken away? We become human beings again. Well, what does that mean? Because it's not completely obvious that we know what that is. So what I'm trying to suggest with this other slide, it may be a bit busy, but it's suggesting that there's multiple different ages that we've transitioned through. Right? A pre-industrial economy, a pre-industrial age, the industrial age, which actually disrupted the pre-industrial age, movement towards information ages, and then hopefully into a more intelligent age. So when we were in the pre-industrial age, and we actually as a group spent a lot of time with it yesterday on the topic of aging, there is an idea of it takes a village. Right? How do I go back to the community? How do I know when I have direct purpose? I'm codependent with others in my community. The passing of wisdom, the respect of elders, and how that all increased the chances of success and survival of our race. That all existed in the pre-industrial economy. And what I'd argue is that the industrial age has actually disrupted that. To some degree, it's made us a bit less human. And as we move forward into the information age and beyond, we need to be thinking a bit more about what it means to be human. And that's what my esteemed colleagues are going to be talking a bit more about. So simplistically, Rebecca, to be overly simplistic, and they're going to do a little bit better job of introducing themselves than I can, but Rebecca is an entrepreneur, and she's going to talk to us a bit more about her capabilities and the insight she has into what I'll call the new face of the new retiree. There's a lot of preconceived notions that are frankly not accurate about the segment, if it is indeed a segment, and Rebecca's going to put a closer face on that for us. Tom's going to talk a bit more about being an activist. Tom reminded me that he's an activist, and having been arrested, that gives him a lifelong card-carrying capability. But he's going to talk a bit more about activism and what it means to have impact from this group, if we want to call it a segment. And then third, Ken's going to talk to us a bit about being at the intersection of research and industry. So that, I think, is going to be part of our actionable tone as to how do we go about bringing it to life, right? So not just rethinking, but also doing. So with that, I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to ask Rebecca to step up and tell us a little bit more about the new retiree.
The new retiree. Thanks, Mark. And thank you so much to AMP and to Annalee for today. It really is a wonderful opportunity for us all to bring aging into the limelight in a positive way. Now, I'm going to stand here in front of you today as somebody a little bit different to these guys, I think. I've been lucky enough to meet them yesterday. What I'm doing isn't studying the older people in the world or in Australia. It's working with them every day, 20 hours a day, online, all the time. I started a business 2 years ago from my couch at night to see if the over 60 was online and if they wanted to engage with each other. Today, I sit here with 530,000 unique visitors a month, 1.7 million page views a month, and an engaged audience that is commenting about 9 times more often than News Limited's, major online publications, or Mamma Mia, some of the Mummy Markets publications. Over 60s are online. Who would have thought? The Human Rights Commissioner told me they wouldn't be when I started this. It constantly astounds me that we are breaking down a perception of what an older person should be and that they should be old. So I'm going to show you a few things today. Hopefully it's going to be fun, it's going to be quick, and we're going to get you to understand what we're seeing online and how you can get involved. For the first bit, I want to have a bit of fun. I want to show you what I've seen, because what I'm doing, it may not be the easiest pathway as a small business owner in Australia, trying to, I guess, break down a perception of a generation that is frankly quite technology savvy. They've been on the internet as long as I have. I'm not sure why we don't believe that they can be. And yet the media and business a lot of the time feels like it's against us in that perception. And I think we all need to help the change that needs to happen. So I'm going to talk to you about the classic corporate. I'm going to talk to you about the classic media player. And then I'm going to introduce to you what we've found online, the new age retiree. And I'm going to leave you with a challenge or an opportunity today, hopefully. But first of all, let's talk about the classic corporate. I, in the last 2 years in building a business, have had to find a way to make that business break even so that we can grow that business that's now 9 staff, serving media 20 hours a day, online, real time. When I go out to talk about a 60-year-old being online, I get wonderful comments like 60-year-olds are looking for aged care and health needs, not online services. I get great comments like my grandmother, who in the person's mind is closer to 80, but really is 60, doesn't go on holidays anymore. She doesn't need these things. Accessibility. You won't find many of them online when I talk about the 60-year-old. Older people want older people products when they buy things, not things like supermarkets and pharmaceuticals and travel and leisure and events. And the most entertaining one, which is you can't find an over 60 on the internet. You can only find them by advertising on TV, which comes out of our mainstream brands buying media at the moment. And let's make campaigns that win awards, not ones that touch people. in the media industry. So this is the most classic statement that I get out of a retailer you would all know, but I won't embarrass, whose ad agency said to me, we don't brief over 54, but I can tell you inside that retailer, if 54 isn't the baseline customer, there would be a big question mark in our minds. The fact is, that's what I see every day. In the media, when I go on television or into the mainstream, I'm seen as the advocate for the very old. That's what the Today Show lays over the top of me for the owner of a business advocating 60-year-olds. You can't help but laugh, but this is the problem we've got, is how many of you are 60? Right, how many of you know 60-year-olds? 60-year-olds are young. They're vibrant. They've got so much to bring. And this has become my job, is disrupting the classic view of 60 being old, because we all grew up with 60 being old when we were young. But 60 isn't old anymore. It's middle-aged today. And so in building a community that's this large, we've put together, I guess, the real-time view of what these people look like today online, because we have 10% of the Australian and New Zealand's population of over 60 online. I didn't think we could do this in 2 years since the day we started with no media help, right? But we are, and we're getting bigger and bigger every day. We're growing at about 20% a month at the moment as a media outlet, but it's all about the conversation. We get 50,000 comments a week online from over 60s. So what we're finding is quite fun. We ran a survey, nearly 4,000 people commented back in a 75-question survey, and the insights were revolutionary. Even the ABS has not found a cohort like this in their surveys. Okay, this group says 95% of them say they are in good health, according to their own judgment. 87% buy pharmaceuticals every month. Right? They want to live well. 40% plan to travel overseas in the next year. Right? 70% eat out at least monthly. Another 40% are eating out fortnightly. They are very, very keen to work. Right? Predominantly, the audience we have online is white collar, educated, quite capable, quite interested in their own career paths and in fulfillment. Increasingly, they want to stay in the workforce longer than the age of 65. 40% said that. 36% are actually employed, and 50% of the reader online is retired. But 23% have contemplated running their own business recently, and 30% have contemplated further education or training. I'm not sure that there's a whole lot of service providers out there offering them the things they might be contemplating, is probably the big question mark. And they're wealthier than ever. In the race to get to the millennial, I'm constantly astounded by the fact that we're ignoring what is, if you look at the metrics of it, the most affluent generation in history. And it's not because they're rich in bank account sense. It's because they're past the point of paying a mortgage. They're in a different phase of life. 75% of our reader is not paying a mortgage anymore. And they have an income of $30,000 at the low point. 30% earned more than $60,000 a year. Right, so they're not highly affluent, but if you take the average millennial target that's earning a median wage of between $40,000 and $60,000 a year, but paying a mortgage, rent, and life expenses out of all of that, the money left in pocket is very different. Right, to give you the rest of the stats, only 30% believe their house is worth less than $350,000. And 68% don't have a financial planner. That's pretty scary. The most stark number I haven't got up here actually, and that is that more than 70% of this population have a superannuation fund of less than $100,000. Our country has a problem if that's a true figure. A big problem, because this generation is the one we're going to have to tap into the homes and make a different financial structure that can support the future. How many of you would say this generation is tech savvy? Not too many hands out there. I'd like to disrupt that thought for you. We have found this group in quite a fast amount of time by internet standards, but 61% call themselves well competent on the internet and 30% say they can get by. Yeah, so that's not bad considering they're socially enabled. They're in social media, a lot of these people we talk to every day. 80% of our reader is using a mobile device. That means the internet for them is leisure. Yeah? Not go to the laptop or the desktop and pull it up and do it as work. It's leisure, if you think about the way we use our mobile devices. And 26% shop online every month. But, and this is probably the most heartbreaking part of it, 90% believe that Australian companies are not listening to them. That, to me, is heartbreaking, because that means that the mainstream businesses are not talking to them the right way, are not listening to the ways they want to communicate, and 88% feel that there's discrimination towards them in the workforce.
Maybe that's a perfect transition to go to Tom, who can talk to us a bit
That's
more
exactly
about
right.
how do we take this group in an activist way to have the impact and raise the awareness. So Tom, if you wouldn't mind.
Terrific. How do I turn?
No. Is my mic on? Yeah, okay, great. Thank you, Mark. And thanks to AMP and to Annalie and to Accenture for hosting this event. I'm from New York City and have been here for a couple of days and already have begun to rethink everything. So it's really wonderful. I'm grateful to be here. I'm going to tell you a brief story about a woman named Madeline Rich, who lives in New York City. She lives in a neighborhood called Harlem. She's 71 years old. She's an African-American woman who worked in an office for many years. And 3 years ago, she was diagnosed with cancer. And she was going to her chemotherapy appointment in Midtown Manhattan. And every day she would walk by the street where we run a center. And she looked in through the window from the sidewalk, and she saw a group of older people sitting around a table using iPads and taking a program together. And she thought it looked like a welcoming place to recover from her chemotherapy. And so she walked in and asked if she could just sit and kind of soak up the positive vibrations that were going on. And we welcomed her. All of our programs are free. And Madeline started observing the classes and realized that this seemed like something she might want to do. And as her chemotherapy was winding down, she began taking one of our Introduction to the iPad classes at the center. And she took that for 20 sessions, became friends with a bunch of people in the room. And she is in sort of semi-retirement. She has a kind of a hobby of making beautiful bags and knitwear and fabric, things like gloves and fashion accessories that she would take to street fairs and gatherings and sell them at a table. And while she was at one of the sessions, somebody mentioned a website called Etsy, which allows people to sell their crafts online. And she asked if we would help her to set up an Etsy account. And one of the volunteers at the center spent a day with her, and she created this Etsy account called Accents by Madeline. And somebody called me on the phone one day from the center and said, Madeline just sold her first bag, and she's sitting here jumping up and down in the chair. And people were saying, oh, what do you mean you sold a bag? How much was it? And so that sort of created this bit of an accelerating process where people around her were excited by what she was doing on Etsy. So we started doing workshops on Etsy. And then they created Etsy accounts and decided it wasn't good enough. And so I walked by the center about a month after that, and Madeline was at one of the computers and asked me if I could help her. And I came over and she said, I'm trying to build a website here, and I was wondering if you could help me with the JavaScript. And we created a monster here, right? We were running a nonprofit. I don't know anything about JavaScript. And so we brought in a group to teach a web development program in an environment called Wix. And a bunch of the entrepreneurial older adults were in there building e-commerce websites around their different projects. And Madeline built a website called accentsbym.com, if any of you want to look it up and buy bags. And she became our sort of poster child for older adult digital entrepreneurship. And we were able to then approach the Consumer Electronics Foundation, which if any of you ever go to the Consumer Electronics Show in the United States, it's this incredibly massive electronics show in Las Vegas every year. And they decided to fund a senior digital entrepreneurship institute at the center. And we had a kickoff event. 75 digital entrepreneurs came in, and Madeline was our featured speaker. And she got up and showed all the different techniques that she's using to sell. And she said one of the great things about it is that she lives in Harlem, which is not necessarily seen as the kind of fashion icon environment, but she's figured out that when she does her fulfillment, she can do it from a Madison Avenue UPS shipping center. And so she ships from Madison Avenue. And people loved that. They thought that was a really cool technique. And it reminded me of that cartoon that says, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog, right? Because people that are older face so much ageism and so many challenges just because of their age, and the technology can be a way for people to mediate that and to overcome it and to harness it for their own interests. And one of the great things that happened at the Institute, that led to a digital entrepreneurship fair in December where we had the senior entrepreneurs bring their items to the center. We're pitching a new project called Buy Old, which is really about getting people to purchase things from older entrepreneurs and kind of help people reinforce each other's economic development strategies. And we're actually doing another one of those one of those fairs in 2 weeks at our center in Manhattan. But my favorite part of the whole kickoff event that we did was Madeline was talking about her bags, and she was showing them, and somebody said, "How much is that bag?" And she said, "It's $28. And one of the younger people in the audience said, do you sew them yourself? And she said, yes. And she said, well, why don't you just pay other people to do it? And Madeline said, well, because I don't get the same quality. I've tried it. And I've decided that I would rather make less money and express myself through the bags and get the kind of bag and the kind of relationship to my customer that I wanted. And that brings me to something that Mark was talking about yesterday, which is really about sort of what we're carrying with older adults today in the society. And so I have 3 lessons that I want to just mention briefly. One is that I'll start with this notion that institutions matter. If Madeline hadn't walked by our storefront, she wouldn't have come in and we wouldn't have been able to have an experience with her and her group of acolytes now that are leading this charge. That center is the result of 12 years worth of work. I founded the nonprofit Older Adults Technology Services 12 years ago, and very slowly we were able to build a citywide organization in New York City with support from the city council and from the mayor's office and from a whole bunch of different corporate philanthropy agents and philanthropic foundations. And now we have a 2,700 square foot retail space in Chelsea in Manhattan that's on the street with full glass frontage, and people can walk in and have a world-class experience. It feels a little bit like going to an Apple store. And so for those of you who come to New York periodically, you're all welcome to come and do a little tour. But institutions matter. We were able to build an institution that became a home for these things to happen. We can talk more about that in Q&A if you want to hear about it. But it matters a lot to be able to sustain those things and create this dynamic of change. Secondly, listening to older adults and what they want matters a lot. I think of myself as a facilitator. Our whole organization is about creating a vessel into which people can pour their aspirations, and we'll hold that stuff for them. So if Madeline shows up and wants to learn JavaScript, well, we're going to figure out how to get her some JavaScript training. I don't know how to do it, but somebody's going to, and we can make that happen for her. The trick, though, is to create environments where we don't do the script for people and tell them how to do it. We're focused broadly on technology learning and adoption for older adults, but we don't really decide what they're going to use or how we're going to teach it to them. We want to make sure that their needs are met. And then the last piece gets right to the heart of what Mark was asking about yesterday, which is how do we create a sort of a place for wisdom in today's society? How do we do something with older adults that can help us become more humane and help us do something with modern society where we're not losing our humanity through our economic practices? And one of the critical things there is Madeline's answer to that question about hiring people to do her bags. What was fascinating about to me is I don't know a lot of people. I'm 48. I don't know a lot of people that are my age or younger who would have had that answer. They would have said, how can I make more money? How can I build something at scale? How can I get sustainability? How can I get venture capital funding to make this bigger? A lot of older people have a different time horizon and a different set of parameters and thoughts about what they're doing. I'm not sure I call it wisdom, but there's something special going on where somebody says, I wanted to express myself in a more authentic way through my economic activities here, and this is how I'm doing it, and I don't need to answer to anybody else. And that kind of little lesson in there to me opens up a whole question around senior identity that I believe, I'll finish with this, is I think understanding what it means to be an older person, aside from the issues around impairment and decline and frailty, but there's something really magical going on with older adults today, and people have talked about it from a lot of different angles. But if we can understand those characteristics that are driving the older adult identity, the new older person, and appreciate that and connect to it and harness it, I think we'll move a lot forward toward achieving some of these ideas around humanizing our societies that Rebecca and Mark and I think Ken will talk about today. That's my 8 minutes. Thanks.
And now I'm going to ask Ken Smith to start now. Ken is with the Stanford Center on Longevity, and he's going to take this intersection for us between humanity and corporate environments.
Thank you, Mark. And I'm getting in line here doing this, but I certainly want to take the time to thank AMP for having me here, to thank Annalee for setting all of this up, and for Accenture for sponsoring this panel. So I thought what I would try to do as another person who's working in aging, you've heard a few this morning, is to try to do something a little bit different and really work off of Mark's construct of, let's call it post-industrial support of aging, and to put a little bit of meat maybe around that structure and give you something to think about and to hang that on. So stepping back maybe, let's say 6 years ago, I started at the Center on Longevity 6 years ago. I'm actually an engineer by background, so kind of not the normal background for doing what I'm doing. The first thing that we thought about back then as a center on aging was awareness. Nobody really would pay attention to this if you went into an actual business meeting to talk about aging. The late Barbara Strauch, who was a friend of the center and was the health and science editor for the New York Times, kept trying to help us, but said, it's really difficult to put aging on the front page because there's no disaster, there's no news, right? We can't talk about a late-breaking demographic story, right? These things evolve over long periods of time. But somehow, some way, over the last 5 years, the landscape around aging has changed a lot. And I think it's indicative of the fact that we're here at Amplify talking about aging, that you've seen some pictures about the front of the New York Times. You've seen Google starting up Calico, perhaps, as an enterprise around aging. So we seem to have done okay, which is a sign that even if we don't necessarily know the way to get there, there are ways to make it. But now we're moving into what are we going to do about this? And I would, I guess, posit that the first responses, and we're starting to see a lot of responses now from businesses kind of up and down the scale. One of the fun parts of my job is I'm in the middle of the Silicon Valley. I get to spend a lot of time with startup companies, get to see quite a few of the large multinationals as well. And there is a lot of response now coming on aging. And I guess I would posit that what we are seeing is an industrial age response as the initial response on aging. And to put a little bit of a point on that, I think that we still are thinking about older people as a separate group, not us. It's a them, it's a not us. And to put a little bit of data on that, highly non-scientific, it would be rejected highly by my colleagues at Stanford. Before I came down here, I went on to a site called AngelList. Not sure how many of you know about that, but it's a site where startup companies get matched with angel investors, and they look for it. And I put in aging as a keyword search and got, let's say, it's about 135 hits. There was more, but some of them had to be filtered out because it was aging of boats and things like that. But if you look at the things that are actually aging, 120 of those 135 startups were either about caregiving or about healthcare, which left the remaining balance of 15 that were actually intended to be targeted at the older individuals themselves. So I think our response in the industrial age paradigm is that we are now jumping to the fore to figure out how do we care for these people, how do we take care of them, how do we put them aside, how do we scale that? And I was struck recently, I read a book, which is excellent, by the way, by Atul Gawande called Being Mortal. And there's a quote in there from Dr. Karen Brown Wilson, who was one of the pioneers of assisted living in the U.S. And she said, safety is what we want for those who we love, and autonomy is what we want for ourselves. And that hit home for me, I think. And I think what we're seeing is we've seen the safety responses, not the autonomy responses. And so I think I would suggest that if we are looking to move to that post-industrial age response, that we need to be talking about inclusion of older people, about understanding what they know. I think the businesses like we've seen with Rebecca are few and far between at this point. I think they're fantastic. To put another point on what she said, we've actually been doing a project working with Brookdale, who's the largest assisted living provider in the U.S., interviewing people who are in their facilities and who are over 80. So now we're talking about technology and about, instead of what can we do for them, what makes a good day? What are the aspirations of somebody who's 80 living in a retirement home? And what we got back really kind of fall into three basic categories. We want to remain active physically and mentally. We want to stay connected to those that we love. and we want to feel that we're bringing something to others. And I guess I would suggest that if we asked the 60 to 80, we'd hear that. If we asked the 30 to 50, we'd probably hear that same thing. So I think the point here really is, as you're thinking about your business forays into aging now, I think it's time to move past the what are we doing for them to the what are we doing with them. And I guess I'll close here, because this whole festival is about sparks. And so our little bit that we're trying at the Center on Longevity is we're entering our third year of a worldwide design competition for university students. We've gotten great response. We've had people from all over the globe, not Australia, unfortunately, so you guys have to work on that. But the first 2 years, maybe we were guilty of the same thing. We did a contest on helping people with dementia the first year. The second year, helping people with mobility restrictions. Got a lot of the same kind of industrial age responses. So this year, we're actually launching into the competition, intentionally trying to break that mold, and we're asking university students around the world to give us designs that will increase happiness in longevity. And we don't think we can find a way that they can do that without talking to older people. If they do, it's going to be incredibly entertaining to see what a group of university-age students thinks is going to be fun for a group of people, let's say, over 60. So I would invite you to join us at longevity.stanford.edu and follow that as we go. And I think that's probably enough for the moment. Let's get to the questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Ken.
Yep.